The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with tension as representatives from dozens of worlds gathered to witness what many called the trial of the century. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Elena Martinez, her weathered face calm despite the chaos surrounding her. She represented the last free humans in the galaxy, and today would decide their fate. The Karathi judge, a towering figure with silver scales and cold yellow eyes, raised his clawed hand for silence. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. The humans have been found guilty of the Terra incident. Their reckless colony ship destroyed our sacred breeding grounds on Karathi Prime's moon. Thousands of our young died because of human carelessness. Elena stepped forward. Your Honor, it was an accident. Our navigation systems failed during the solar storm. We tried to change course, but— Silence! The judge's roar cut her off. The damage is done. Your species has proven too dangerous to remain among civilized worlds. The Council has reached its decision. Around the hall, alien representatives whispered among themselves. Some looked sympathetic, but most seemed relieved. Humans had always been the outsiders in galactic society. They were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too different from the established order. The judge continued, By the power of the Galactic Council, all humans are hereby exiled from civilized space. You will be transported to Kepler 442c, a dead world on the galaxy's edge. There you will remain until the end of your days. Elena's heart sank. She had expected punishment, but not this. Your Honor, that planet cannot support life. You're sentencing 50,000 innocent people to death. That is no longer our concern, the judge replied coldly. Perhaps your species will learn humility in their final days. The trial was over. Guards surrounded Elena and her small diplomatic team, leading them away as the council moved on to other business. Within hours, the great ships began gathering humans from across the galaxy. Families were torn from their homes on mining colonies, research stations, and trading posts. Scientists, farmers, engineers, teachers, children, and elderly all were loaded onto transport vessels like cargo. The journey to Kepler 442c took 3 weeks. The transports were cramped and poorly supplied, clearly meant for short trips, not long voyages. Elena moved through the ships, trying to keep spirits up and organize the chaos. She found herself working with people she had never met before. Dr. Lisa Park, a microbiologist from the Titan Research Station, Marcus Webb, a mining engineer from the asteroid belt, Joe Collins, a farmer from the agricultural world of New Kansas. What do we know about this planet? Elena asked during one of their planning meetings in the transport's cargo hold. Dr. Park pulled up data on her tablet. It's bad. Very bad. The atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide and methane. No oxygen. Surface temperature ranges from -40 to +60 degrees Celsius. Constant radiation storms from the nearby pulsar. No water we can detect. Marcus shook his head. The Karathi aren't just exiling us. They're executing us slowly. Maybe that's what they want us to think, Joe said quietly. The old farmer had been listening carefully. But humans have survived in harsh places before. Our ancestors lived through ice ages, droughts, and plagues. Maybe we can survive this too. Elena looked around at the crowded cargo hold, filled with frightened families and crying children. We have to try, we have no choice. When the transports finally reached Kepler 442c, the sight through the viewports was heartbreaking. The planet looked like a diseased eye staring back at them, gray and brown with swirling toxic clouds and no sign of life anywhere. The transport, pilots, alien mercenaries hired by the Karathi, wasted no time. They landed at the first flat area they found and began unloading their human cargo. The air outside was poison. Everyone had to wear emergency breathing masks, but they only had a few hours of air each. The Karathi had been generous enough to provide basic survival supplies, some prefab shelters, water recyclers, food for maybe 2 months, and basic tools. It was barely enough to set up a temporary camp, let alone build a permanent settlement. This is it, announced the lead pilot, a bug-like creature with multiple eyes. Don't try to signal for rescue. No one is coming back for you. This system is now marked as quarantined. Any ship that comes here will be destroyed. The transports lifted off immediately, leaving the humans alone on the hostile world. Elena stood with the other leaders, watching the ships disappear into the toxic sky. Around them, 50,000 humans began the grim work of trying to survive. The first night was terrible. The prefab shelters could only hold about half the population. The rest had to crowd together in the transport containers that had been left behind. The temperature dropped to -30 degrees, and the wind howled like a living thing. Several elderly people died from the cold and stress. Dr. Park worked frantically with the water recyclers, trying to process the ice they had found in shallow deposits. The machines kept breaking down from the acidic compounds in the frozen water. Marcus led teams to set up the air processors, but they were only meant for small groups, not thousands of people. Joe organized the food distribution, rationing everything carefully. At this rate, we have maybe 60 days before we start starving, he told Elena privately. The second day brought new horrors. A radiation storm swept across their camp, forcing everyone into the deepest shelters they could find. 3 people died from exposure, and dozens more became sick. The emergency medical supplies were already running low. Elena called a meeting of all the group leaders that evening. They gathered in the largest shelter, a cramped space meant for 20 people but holding 50. The faces around her were grim, but she also saw something else. Determination. We all know the situation, she began. The Karathi expect us to die here. Maybe they're right. Maybe this planet will kill us all. But I'm not ready to give up. And I don't think you are either. Marcus nodded grimly. The mining equipment in the containers might help us dig deeper shelters. Get us away from the radiation. The water recyclers can be modified, Dr. Park added. I've been studying the chemical composition of the ice. It's toxic, but not impossible to clean. We just need time to figure out how. Joe leaned forward. I've been looking at the soil samples. It's poisonous to earth plants, but maybe we can change that. I've seen farmers reclaim dead land before. An old woman in the corner spoke up. My grandmother survived the resource wars on Earth. She always said humans are like weeds, we grow where nothing else can. Elena felt a spark of hope. Then we start tomorrow. We're not going to just survive. We're going to prove them wrong. This planet thinks it can kill us, but it doesn't know humans very well. Over the next few days, the camp began to organize itself. People were assigned to teams based on their skills. Engineers worked on expanding the shelters and improving the life support systems. Scientists studied the planet's harsh environment, looking for anything they could use. Medical teams treated the sick and rationed their dwindling supplies. Children were kept busy with lessons and games, shielding them from the worst of the adult fears. Teachers worked with parents to maintain some sense of normalcy, even in the poisonous wasteland. Elena found herself becoming the unofficial leader of the entire settlement. People came to her with problems, disputes, and ideas. She realized that their survival would depend not just on technology and resources, but on staying united. In the face of impossible odds, they had to remain human. The Karathi had exiled them to this dead world, expecting them to fade away quietly. They had stripped away their advanced technology, their comfortable lives, their connection to the galaxy, but they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated what humans could do when they had nothing left to lose. As Elena stood outside the main shelter on their 10th night, looking up at the alien stars through her breathing mask, she made a promise to herself and to everyone depending on her. They would not just survive on this dead planet. Somehow, some way, they would make it live. The first winter on Kepler 442c was a nightmare that tested every human on the planet. 3 months after their exile, the settlement had already lost over 2,000 people to radiation sickness, equipment failures, and the brutal cold that could freeze a person solid in minutes. Elena Martinez stood in the main command shelter, studying the grim numbers on her tablet. The settlement's population had dropped from 50,000 to 47,800. Each number represented a person Someone's parent, child, or friend who had died in this poisonous wasteland. The water recyclers are failing faster than we can fix them, Dr. Lisa Park reported, her face drawn with exhaustion. She had been working 18-hour days trying to keep their life support systems running. We've lost 3 more units this week. The acid in the ice is eating through the filters. Marcus Webb looked up from his engineering reports. The radiation shielding on Shelter Block C is cracked. We need to evacuate 50 families, but we don't have anywhere to put them. His hands were stained with chemical burns from handling the toxic materials they used for repairs. Joe Collins entered the shelter, shaking ice crystals from his jacket. The greenhouse domes are holding, but barely. I lost another crop section yesterday. The soil treatment isn't working fast enough. The old farmer had aged 10 years in the past few months, but his eyes still held determination. Elena nodded grimly. What about the deep mining operation? We've hit a layer of bedrock. That's harder than anything we've seen, Marcus replied. The drilling equipment is wearing out and we can't replace it. But we did find something interesting, mineral deposits that might be useful if we can figure out how to process them. The early days had been pure survival. They had quickly learned that the prefab shelters provided by the Karathi were death traps. The thin walls couldn't handle the temperature swings, and the air recycling systems broke down constantly. Marcus had organized teams to cannibalize the transport containers, using the metal plating to reinforce their shelters and build new ones. The breakthrough came when they realized they had to go underground. The surface was too hostile, with radiation storms that could kill a person in hours and temperature swings that cracked metal. Marcus led the effort to dig deep into the planet's crust, using mining equipment salvaged from the transport ships. We're not just hiding from this planet, he had told his workers. We're going to make it work for us. The underground tunnels became their lifeline. 30 feet below the surface, the temperature was more stable, and the rock provided natural radiation shielding. They carved out living spaces, workshops, and storage areas. It was cramped and dark, but it was safe. Dr. Park's work with the water recycling systems had become critical to their survival. The ice deposits they found were full of toxic compounds that would kill anyone who drank them. But she discovered that certain bacteria from Earth could actually process some of these toxins. It's like a puzzle, she explained to Elena during one of their evening briefings. These bacteria evolved to handle pollution on Earth. Here, they're finding new things to eat. I've been cultivating different strains, trying to find ones that can handle the worst compounds. Her laboratory was a converted storage container filled with jury-rigged equipment. She worked with test tubes and microscopes that had been salvaged from the transport ship's medical bays. Every day brought new experiments, new failures, and occasionally small successes. The food situation was desperate. Joe Collins had been trying to grow earth crops in the alien soil, but everything kept dying. The soil was not just barren, it was actively hostile to earth life. It contained heavy metals and acids that burned plant roots. I've been thinking about this wrong, Joe told Elena one day. I've been trying to make earth plants grow in alien soil, but maybe I need to change the soil first. He began working with Dr. Park to develop soil treatments. They used ash from their fires, organic waste from the settlement, and even human waste to create compost. Slowly, very slowly, they began to see results. The first earth plant to grow in the treated soil was a potato, tough, hardy, and able to survive in harsh conditions. It's not much, Joe said, holding up the small, misshapen potato. But it's life, real earth life growing in alien soil. The success gave everyone hope, but it also highlighted how much work they still had to do. One potato plant could not feed 50,000 people. They needed to scale up everything: the soil treatment, the growing areas, the seed supplies. The children were both the settlement's greatest hope and its greatest worry. They adapted to the harsh conditions better than adults, but they were also more vulnerable to radiation and disease. Elena made sure that the children's areas were the best protected spaces in the settlement. A woman named Kate Thompson organized the children's education. She had been a teacher on New Kansas before the exile, and she refused to let the children's learning stop just because they were stranded on a dead planet. These kids are going to grow up here, she told Elena. They need to know how to survive, but they also need to know that they're still human. They need stories, math, science, art, all of it. The children's classes were held in a converted cargo container, decorated with drawings and maps of Earth. Kate taught them about their home planet, but she also taught them about Kepler 442c. The children learned to identify dangerous radiation levels, to spot signs of equipment failure, and to work together in teams. One of the children, a 10-year-old boy named Tommy, became fascinated with the mining operations. He would spend hours watching Marcus and his team's work, asking endless questions about the equipment and the mineral samples. "This rock is different from the others," Tommy told Marcus one day, holding up a sample he had found. "It's heavier, and it has these little crystal things in it." Marcus examined the sample and his eyes widened. The boy had found a deposit of rare earth metals, materials that could be used to build advanced electronics. It was exactly what they needed to repair and upgrade their failing equipment. "Good eye, kid," Marcus said, ruffling Tommy's hair. "You might just have saved us all." The discovery led to a new mining operation focused on extracting these valuable materials. It was dangerous work in the unstable underground tunnels, but it gave them access to resources they desperately needed. As the months passed, the settlement began to develop its own culture and routines. People worked in shifts to keep the critical systems running 24 hours a day. Meals were communal affairs in the main gathering spaces, with everyone sharing whatever food was available. Elena found herself making decisions that no human leader had ever faced before. When the medical supplies ran low, she had to decide who got treatment and who didn't. When food was scarce, she had to choose between feeding the workers who kept the systems running and the children who represented their future. "I never wanted to be a leader," she confided to Dr. Park one evening. "I was just a diplomat. I dealt with trade agreements and cultural exchanges. I never had to decide who lives and who dies." "None of us wanted this," Dr. Park replied. "But we're the ones who are here. We're the ones who have to make it work." The worst crisis came during month 8, when a massive radiation storm hit the settlement. The early warning systems failed, and the storm was stronger than anything they had experienced before. The surface installations were destroyed, and several underground areas were flooded when the ice melted and then refroze, cracking the tunnel walls. They lost over 1,000 people in 3 days. The medical facilities were overwhelmed, and the surviving equipment was pushed beyond its limits. For a moment, it seemed like the planet had finally won. But then something remarkable happened. The survivors didn't give up. They worked together to rebuild, to rescue the trapped, to care for the wounded. They shared their last food rations and gave their only warm clothes to the sick. Elena watched from the command shelter as people she had never seen before worked side by side to repair the damage. A former corporate executive was carrying supplies for a teenage apprentice mechanic. A retired professor was helping a young mother care for her children while she worked on repairing the water systems. "We're not the same people who were exiled here," she realized. The soft, civilized humans who had depended on galactic society for everything were gone. In their place were harder, tougher people who had learned to survive in hell itself. The first year ended with the settlement still alive, though barely. They had lost over 8,000 people, but the survivors were stronger, more united, and more determined than ever. As Elena looked around at the faces in the command shelter, weathered by radiation, scarred by hard work, but still hopeful, she knew that they had passed their first test. The dead planet had tried to kill them, but they were still here, still human, still fighting, and they were just getting started. 5 years had passed since the exile, and Kepler 442c was no longer the same dead world that had greeted the first human settlers. What had once been a barren wasteland was now dotted with strange silver domes that gleamed against the toxic sky. Steam rose from hidden vents, and the sound of machinery hummed beneath the ground. Elena Martinez, now showing gray in her hair and lines around her eyes, stood on the observation deck of Central Command. The structure had been built into a hillside, its walls made from processed local minerals that sparkled with an inner light. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the settlement that had grown from desperate survival into something approaching civilization. The atmospheric processors are working better than we hoped, Dr. Lisa Park reported, joining Elena at the window. She looked different now, tougher, with calloused hands and burn scars from years of dangerous experiments. Dome 7 achieved 80% Earth normal atmosphere yesterday. We're actually breathing real air in there. The breakthrough had come in year 3, when Dr. Park's bacterial experiments had finally yielded results. She had been working with Earth bacteria, trying to find strains that could survive in the toxic environment. Most died within hours, but a few adapted in unexpected ways. It started with accident, Dr. Park explained to the weekly settlement meeting. I had contaminated samples sitting in the lab when a radiation storm hit. When I came back, the bacteria hadn't just survived, they had multiplied, and they were producing oxygen. The discovery had changed everything. The bacteria were consuming the toxic compounds in the atmosphere and converting them into breathable gases. Dr. Park and her team had spent months learning to cultivate and control the process, but eventually, they had created their first atmospheric processor, a building-sized machine that could slowly transform the air inside a sealed dome. The domes themselves were Marcus Webb's masterpiece. The mining engineer had become the settlement's chief architect, designing structures that could withstand the planet's harsh conditions while housing the atmospheric processors. Each dome was built from refined local materials, metals and crystals, extracted from the planet's crust and processed in furnaces that Marcus had built from salvaged parts. The new dome design is 30% more efficient, Marcus explained to Elena as they walked through construction site 12. Around them, workers in radiation suits were assembling the framework for another dome. We're using the crystalline formations we found in the deep mines. They're incredible. They actually store and focus energy. One of these crystals can power a life support system for a week. The workers had changed too. These weren't the soft colonists who had been exiled 5 years ago. They moved with purpose and efficiency, their bodies hardened by years of dangerous work. They knew their equipment inside and out, because their lives depended on it working perfectly. Joe Collins had become the settlement's agricultural director, overseeing food production that now fed over 45,000 people. The population had recovered from the disasters of the first years, and new children were being born who had never known any world but Kepler 4m42c. The crop yields are up 20% this season, Joe reported, leading Elena through Agricultural Dome 3. Inside the dome, neat rows of vegetables grew under artificial lights, their roots extending into specially treated soil. The soil treatment process is working so well that we're actually improving the quality of the land. The breakthrough in agriculture had come from understanding the planet's unique chemistry. The toxic compounds that killed Earth plants could be neutralized and converted into nutrients through a complex process involving bacteria, heat treatment, and careful chemical balance. Joe had worked with Dr. Park to develop soil that was actually more fertile than many Earth farmlands. See these tomatoes? Joe pointed to plants heavy with red fruit. They're bigger and more nutritious than anything I grew on New Kansas. This planet is teaching us things about farming that we never knew. The children born on Kepler 442c were different from their parents in subtle ways. They adapted to the lower gravity and higher radiation levels better than adults. They learned to read atmospheric readings and equipment diagnostics as easily as children on Earth learned to read books. Tommy, the boy who had discovered the rare Earth deposits, was now 15 and working as an apprentice to Marcus. He moved through the settlement's tunnels and workshops with complete confidence, equally comfortable with advanced electronics and heavy machinery. The new power grid is almost ready, Tommy reported to Elena during her weekly rounds. We're using the crystal arrays to store energy from the geothermal plants. When the next radiation storm hits, we'll actually be able to harvest power from it instead of hiding. The idea of harvesting energy from radiation storms had come from the children. They approached problems differently than adults without preconceived notions about what was possible. Working with the engineering teams, they had developed collector arrays that could capture and store the massive electrical discharges from the storms. Dr. Park's laboratory had evolved into a full research complex, with teams working on dozens of different projects. The bacterial research had branched out into new areas: waste processing, mineral extraction, even primitive manufacturing at the cellular level. "We're not just surviving anymore," Dr. Park told Elena during a tour of the research facilities. "We're innovating. Some of the things we're discovering here could revolutionize science if we ever get back to the galaxy." One of her most promising projects involved using bacteria to process the planet's unusual mineral deposits. The bacteria could extract pure metals and rare compounds from ore that would be impossible to refine using traditional methods. It was slow, but it produced materials of incredible purity and strength. The settlement's manufacturing capabilities had grown far beyond simple repairs and maintenance. They were now producing advanced electronics, precision tools, and even experimental spacecraft components. The workshops hummed with activity as teams worked on projects that pushed the boundaries of human engineering. Marcus had established a technical college where experienced workers taught younger people the skills they would need to keep the settlement running. The classes covered everything from basic electronics to advanced metallurgy, but they also included subjects that no Earth school had ever taught: radiation storm prediction, toxic atmosphere processing, and survival engineering. "These kids are learning things that no human has ever known before," Marcus told Elena. "They're becoming a new kind of engineer, adapted to conditions that would kill most people from the civilized galaxy." The settlement's social structure had evolved too. Leadership positions were earned through competence and dedication rather than political connections. People were valued for their skills and contributions, not their backgrounds or previous status. Elena found herself working closely with a council of department heads who had emerged as natural leaders. Dr. Park oversaw all scientific research. Marcus managed construction and engineering. Joe ran agricultural operations. Kate Thompson had become education director, overseeing both the children's schools and the technical training programs. "We're becoming something new," Elena observed during one of their planning meetings. "We're not the same species that was exiled here. We're harder, smarter, more adaptable." The evidence was everywhere. The settlement now had manufacturing facilities that could produce complex electronics from raw materials. The agricultural domes were yielding surplus food that was being processed and stored. The population was growing again, with new families choosing to have children despite the harsh conditions. Most remarkably, they had begun to expand beyond the original settlement site. Survey teams were exploring other regions of the planet, looking for additional resources and suitable locations for new domes. Some areas showed signs of geothermal activity that could provide abundant energy. Others had unique mineral formations that could be valuable for manufacturing. "We found something amazing in the northern continent," reported Captain Sarah Kim, who led the exploration teams. She was one of the new generation of leaders who had emerged during the settlement's growth. Tough, capable people who had proven themselves through action rather than appointment. "There's a valley system where the atmospheric conditions are naturally less toxic. With minimal processing, we could establish surface settlements there. We're talking about living in the open air for the first time since the exile." The prospect of surface settlements was exciting, but it also raised new challenges. The settlement would need to develop transportation systems to connect distant locations. They would need to establish communication networks and supply chains. They were approaching the complexity of a true planetary civilization. Elena often stood on the observation deck in the evenings, watching the lights of the settlement spread out below her. The sight never failed to amaze her. 5 years ago, this had been a dead world where nothing could survive. Now it was home to a thriving human community that was pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The children who had been born here didn't think of Kepler 442c as a place of exile. To them, it was simply home. They played in the domes and tunnels with the confidence of people who belonged. They learned about Earth from books. 20 years had passed since the first humans set foot on Kepler 442c, and the planet was unrecognizable. Where once there had been only toxic wasteland, now sprawling cities stretched across the landscape under protective domes that glittered like jewels against the alien sky. The transformation was so complete that visitors from Earth's golden age would have struggled to believe this was the same dead world. Elena Martinez, now in her 60s, with silver hair and a face marked by decades of hard decisions stood in the central tower of New Haven City. The city was the largest of 7 major settlements that dotted the planet's surface, each one a marvel of human engineering and determination. Through the massive windows, she could see the bustling streets below, filled with people who had been born and raised on this world. The population census is complete, reported Director Kate Thompson, who had grown from a simple teacher into the settlement's chief administrator. 215,000 people across all settlements. The birth rate is stable, and we're seeing the first generation of children whose grandparents were born here. The numbers were staggering. From the original 50,000 exiles, minus the 8,000 lost in the early years, the population had grown to over 200,000. This wasn't just survival. It was a population boom that showed how completely humans had adapted to their new world. Captain Alex Rivers entered the office, still wearing the dust-stained uniform of a space pilot. At 35, he had been born on Kepler 442c and had never known any other world. He represented the new generation of humans who thought of the toxic storms and radiation as natural parts of life. The trading mission to the Kepler system was a complete success, he reported with satisfaction. The independent merchants were amazed by our technology. They're calling our atmospheric processors miracle machines and our quantum computers impossible magic. We've established regular trade routes with 5 different worlds. The development of interstellar travel had been one of the settlement's greatest achievements. Using the unique crystalline formations found deep in the planet's crust, human engineers had developed quantum computing systems that surpassed anything in the known galaxy. These computers could calculate navigation routes through the dangerous radiation fields that surrounded Kepler 442c, allowing ships to travel safely between star systems. Dr. Lisa Park, now the settlement's chief scientist, joined the meeting. Her hair was white and her hands were permanently stained from decades of chemical work, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She had become the mother of an entirely new branch of science, what the settlers called hostile world engineering. The atmospheric processors are working beyond our wildest dreams, she reported. We now have 12 major dome cities with Earth-normal atmosphere, and we're working on a project to terraform an entire continent. The bacterial colonies we've developed don't just clean the air, they're actually improving it. The oxygen levels in some domes are higher than Earth standard. The scientific advances had been remarkable. Working with limited resources and under impossible conditions, the human scientists had developed technologies that seemed almost magical. They had learned to program bacteria to do precise work, to grow living machines that could repair themselves, and to harvest energy from sources that the civilized galaxy had never imagined. Marcus Webb, now chief of planetary engineering, spread holographic displays across the conference table. The images showed construction projects that would have challenged the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. Massive towers rose from the planet's surface, connected by enclosed bridges that spanned kilometers. Underground cities burrowed deep into the planet's crust, their walls lined with the glowing crystals that provided both power and light. The orbital station project is ahead of schedule, Marcus reported. We'll have our first space-based manufacturing facility operational within 2 years. The microgravity environment will let us grow crystals that are impossible to create on the surface. The orbital stations were perhaps the most ambitious project yet attempted. Using materials mined from the planet's crust and refined through bacterial processing, human engineers were building permanent installations in orbit around Kepler 442c. These stations would serve as shipyards, research facilities, and gateways to the galaxy beyond. The children of Kepler 442c had grown into adults who were fundamentally different from their parents. They moved with casual confidence in environments that would kill most galactic citizens within minutes. They understood complex scientific concepts that the best universities in the galaxy struggled to teach. They were equally comfortable with advanced technology and primitive survival skills. Tommy, the boy who had discovered the first rare Earth deposits, was now 35 and served as the settlement's chief resource manager. He had spent his entire adult life exploring the planet's hidden treasures, mapping mineral deposits and geological formations that held the keys to humanity's future. The deep core samples are showing something extraordinary, he reported to the weekly council meeting. There's a layer of crystalline formations about 2 kilometers down that spans the entire planet. If we can tap into it, we'll have enough energy to power our civilization for thousands of years. The planet's geology had turned out to be far more complex than anyone had imagined. The toxic surface conditions were caused by relatively recent volcanic activity, but beneath the poison crust lay treasures that made the world invaluable. Rare metals, energy-storing crystals, and geological formations that could be used for advanced manufacturing were scattered throughout the planet's depths. The social structure of the settlements had evolved into something unique in the galaxy. Leadership was based on competence and merit rather than politics or wealth. People were valued for their contributions to the community's survival and growth. The harsh conditions had eliminated many of the social problems that plagued civilized worlds. There was no room for corruption, laziness, or selfishness when everyone's survival depended on working together. Elena often walked through the settlements, in the evening, observing how the community had developed. Children played in parks under artificial skies, their laughter echoing through the domes. Adults worked in workshops and laboratories, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Elderly, people shared stories of Earth and the early days of the settlement, keeping the community's history alive. We've become something the galaxy has never seen before, Elena reflected during one of her conversations with Dr. Park. We're not just another human colony. We're a new kind of civilization. The evidence was everywhere. The settlements produced technology that was more advanced than anything in the Karathi Empire. Their manufacturing techniques were cleaner and more efficient than the standard galactic methods. Their social systems were more stable and fair than the hierarchical structures that dominated civilized space. Most importantly, they were completely self-sufficient. They grew their own food, manufactured their own equipment, and generated their own energy. They had no need for imports from the galaxy, but they had plenty of exports that other worlds desperately wanted. The quantum computers built on Kepler 442c could perform calculations that required entire facilities on other worlds. The atmospheric processors could make any world habitable within a few years. The bacterial manufacturing systems could produce pure materials from the most contaminated sources. We're getting requests from independent worlds throughout the galaxy, Captain Rivers reported during one of his briefings. They want to hire us to help with their environmental problems. Some of them are offering incredible amounts of money for just one atmospheric processor. The irony was not lost on Elena. The same technology that had saved humanity from extinction was now in high demand throughout the galaxy. The dead world that was supposed to be their grave had become the source of their greatest strength. The trading missions had also brought disturbing news about the galaxy beyond. The Karathi Empire was facing internal problems, resource shortages, environmental damage, and social unrest. Their rigid social system was breaking down as younger generations questioned the old ways of doing things. Some of the independent merchants are asking about asylum, Captain Rivers reported. They want to come here, to learn our ways. They say their own worlds are becoming unlivable. Elena was not surprised. The same arrogance and rigid thinking that had led the Karathi to exile humanity was now causing problems throughout their empire. They had always believed that their way was the only way, that their technology and social systems were superior to all others. Now they were discovering that their approach had serious flaws. The settlements on Kepler 442c had proven that there were other ways to build a civilization. They had shown that cooperation was stronger than hierarchy, that innovation was more valuable than tradition, and that adaptation was better than rigid adherence to old methods. We need to start thinking about our role in the galaxy, Elena told the council during their strategic planning session. We're not just survivors anymore. We're not even just a successful colony. We're becoming a major power, whether we want to or not. The transformation was complete. The humans exiled to a dead world had not just survived, they had thrived beyond anyone's wildest imagination. 40 years after the exile, the Karathi Imperial fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. expecting to find the scattered bones of a failed human settlement. Instead, Admiral Zektar found himself staring at something that defied every assumption his species had held about the universe. "This cannot be correct," the Admiral muttered, his scaled hands gripping the command chair as he studied the sensor readings. The scanners show massive energy signatures, orbital installations, and… are those ships? His aide, Commander Velkan, checked the instruments twice before responding. "Sir, we're detecting at least 50 spacecraft of unknown design in orbit around the planet. The surface shows multiple cities, atmospheric processors, and what appears to be industrial complexes." Admiral Zektar had been a young officer during the human exile. He remembered the trial, the speeches about teaching the lesser species their place in the galaxy. The dead planet was supposed to be a warning to other worlds about the consequences of defying the Karathi Empire. "Establish communication with the human settlement," he ordered. "They will surrender immediately and prepare for reintegration into civilized society." The response came not from a desperate survival bunker, but from a gleaming orbital station that dwarfed the largest Karathi installations. The human who appeared on the view screen was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and confident eyes that showed no fear of the Imperial fleet. "I am President Maria Santos of the Human Coalition," she said calmly. "Welcome to Kepler 442c, Admiral. We've been expecting you." Maria Santos had been elected president 3 years earlier, following Elena Martinez's retirement. She had been born on Kepler 442c and had never known any world but this one. To her, the toxic storms and radiation fields were as natural as sunshine had been to her parents' generation on Earth. "I am Admiral Zektar of the Karathi Imperial Navy," he replied, trying to maintain his authority despite his shock at the sophisticated communication system. "By order of the Galactic Council, you will prepare for immediate evacuation and return to designated human settlements within the Empire." Maria's expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes that made the Admiral uncomfortable. It was the look of someone who held all the advantages and knew it. "That's a generous offer, Admiral, but we must decline. Kepler 442c is our home now. We have no intention of leaving." Behind Maria, through the viewports of the orbital station, the Admiral could see a bustling city in space. Ships moved between docking ports, and humans in environmental suits worked on construction projects that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The technology on display was clearly beyond anything the Karathi possessed. "You do not have a choice in this matter," Admiral Zektar said, his voice rising. "The Karathi Empire has decided to show mercy and readmit humanity to galactic society. You will comply." "Will we?" Maria asked with a slight smile. "Captain Rivers, would you please demonstrate our position?" The space around the Karathi fleet suddenly filled with activity. Ships appeared from behind asteroids and planetary debris where they had been hidden. The vessels were unlike anything the Admiral had ever seen, sleek, crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them. They moved with impossible speed and agility, surrounding the Imperial fleet in a matter of minutes. "How many ships do they have?" Admiral Zektar demanded. "Over 200, sir," Commander Velkan replied, his voice shaking. "And, sir, our weapon systems aren't responding. Something is interfering with our targeting computers." Captain Alex Rivers appeared on a secondary communication channel, his voice calm and professional. "Admiral, your ships are currently experiencing technical difficulties due to our quantum interference systems. Your weapons and navigation are temporarily disabled for your own safety." The Admiral felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had not just survived on the dead planet. They had developed technology that could neutralize the most advanced warships in the galaxy without firing a shot. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Your species was barely capable of basic space travel when you were exiled." 40 years is a long time, Admiral," President Santos replied. "We've learned a great deal about survival, adaptation, and innovation. Would you like a tour of our facilities? I think you'll find our achievements quite impressive." The tour was a revelation that shattered every assumption the Karathi had held about human capabilities. The orbital stations were marvels of engineering that utilized technologies the Empire's best scientists couldn't comprehend. The planetary cities existed in environments that would kill most galactic species within minutes, yet humans lived there comfortably, even thriving. Dr. Lisa Park, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, led the scientific demonstration. She showed the Karathi delegation bacterial manufacturing systems that could produce pure materials from toxic waste, atmospheric processors that could terraform entire continents, and quantum computers that solved problems in seconds that would take Karathi systems years to calculate. "We've had to develop solutions to problems your empire has never faced," she explained to the stunned alien visitors. "When you're exiled to a world that actively tries to kill you, you either innovate or die. We chose to innovate." The Karathi delegation was escorted through manufacturing facilities where humans worked alongside living machines grown from modified bacteria. They saw farms producing food in soil that had been toxic wasteland 4 decades earlier. They witnessed children learning advanced physics and engineering as naturally as their own young learned basic mathematics. Commander Velkan, who served as the delegation's technical expert, was particularly shaken by what he observed. "These aren't the same humans we exiled," he reported to Admiral Zektar. "They've become something else entirely. Their technology is decades ahead of ours in critical areas." The social structure of the human settlements was equally impressive. The Karathi observers expected to find the rigid hierarchies and power, struggles that characterize their own society. Instead, they found a cooperative system where leadership was based on competence and contribution rather than birth or political connections. Tommy, now the settlement's chief resource coordinator, explained their approach during a meeting with the Karathi delegation. "We couldn't afford the luxury of inefficient leadership. When everyone's survival depends on making the right decisions, you naturally choose the people who make the best choices." The economic implications were staggering. The human settlements were completely self-sufficient and produced surplus goods that were in high demand throughout the galaxy. Independent traders were already establishing regular routes to Kepler 442c, bringing news and resources from dozens of worlds. "Half the independent systems in this sector want to establish trade agreements with us," Captain Rivers reported to President Santos during a private briefing. "They're offering incredible terms for our technology and expertise." Admiral Zektar found himself in an impossible position. He had come to collect a failed human colony, and instead discovered a thriving civilization that surpassed the Karathi Empire in several critical technologies. His superiors expected him to return with submissive humans ready to accept their place in the galactic hierarchy. Instead, he was facing a confident, powerful society that had no need for what the Empire offered. "Your people must return to designated settlements," he insisted during his final meeting with President Santos. "The exile was temporary. The Empire is prepared to forgive past transgressions and restore humanity to its proper place in galactic society." President Santos leaned back in her chair, surrounded by advisors who represented the best minds of 2 generations. "And what would that proper place be, Admiral? Second-class citizens in someone else's empire, grateful recipients of Karathi charity? You would have the protection of the Empire, access to galactic markets, participation in civilized society," the Admiral replied, though his words sounded hollow even to himself. "We already have access to galactic markets through our trading partners," Maria pointed out. "As for protection, I think we've demonstrated that we can take care of ourselves. And as for civilized society, well, I think we've built something better than what you're offering." The final demonstration came when a Karathi patrol ship, acting without authorization, attempted to force its way past the human defensive perimeter. The ship found itself gently but irresistibly guided to a safe orbit, its systems completely overridden by human technology. The crew was unharmed but thoroughly humbled. "We could have destroyed your ship in a dozen different ways," Captain Rivers explained to the patrol ship's commander. "Instead, we chose to demonstrate restraint. That's the difference between your civilization and ours." Admiral Zektar realized that his mission had failed completely. The humans were not the desperate exiles he had expected to find. They were a major power in their own right, with technology and resources that made them valuable allies or dangerous enemies. His final report to the Karathi, High Council was a masterpiece of diplomatic understatement. The human settlement has achieved unexpected success. Recommend immediate diplomatic engagement and reconsideration of previous policies. President Santos's response to the Empire's generous offer was broadcast throughout the galaxy, carried by independent traders and transmitted by the Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with tension. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the massive circular table, their various forms creating strange shadows under the blue-white lights. At the center of their debate was humanity, the newest and most controversial addition to their ancient alliance. Ambassador Vex of the Altari leaned forward, his silver skin gleaming as he spoke. The humans have been part of our council for only 6 months, and already they demand equal voting rights. They want trade agreements. They want military partnerships. He paused, letting his words sink in. They forget their place. Counselor. Thal, representing the insectoid creche, clicked his mandibles in agreement. Their world is nothing special. Earth scores only Class 7 on the habitability scale. Most of our home worlds are Class 3 or 4. These humans come from a soft, easy planet, yet they act like they belong among the great civilizations. The debate had been going on for hours. Some council members wanted to simply ignore humanity's requests. Others suggested giving them minor roles in galactic affairs. But Vex had a different idea, one that would solve their human problem permanently. Propose we give them exactly what they want, Vex said, his voice smooth and cold. They want to prove they belong among us? Let them prove it on Korath Prime. The hall fell silent. Even the translator devices seemed to pause before converting his words into the various alien languages. Korath Prime. Every species in the galaxy knew that name. It was a Class 15 death world, the highest rating on the danger scale. 3 different alien expeditions had tried to establish colonies there over the past century. None had lasted more than a week. The Vrex had lost 200 colonists in 4 days. The proud Zephyrians had fled after just 2 days, leaving behind only automated distress beacons. Even the hardy silicon-based rocklings had abandoned their attempt, after losing half their expedition to the planet's impossible conditions. You cannot be serious, whispered Elder Nira of the Peaceful Symphons. That world has killed thousands. The storms alone can strip flesh from bone. The gravity would crush most of our people. The very air is toxic. Vex smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his dark eyes. Exactly. The humans think they're tough because they survived some small wars on their little world. They think they deserve respect because they managed to reach space. Let them try their luck on a real challenge. Counselor Brix of the Aquatic Tidewalkers bubbled nervously. What if they actually succeed? What if they establish a colony? Impossible, Vex replied firmly. We've run the calculations. Even our best estimates give them less than a 2% chance of survival past the first week. The humans will either die quickly, or they'll flee home with their pride broken. Either way, they'll learn their proper place in the galaxy. The vote was closer than Vex had expected, but it passed. 7 species voted in favor, 4 against, with 1 abstention. The humans would be offered the opportunity to establish a colony on Korath Prime, presented as a chance to prove their worth to the galactic community. 3 weeks later, Captain Reed stood on the bridge of the colony ship Determination, reading the official mission briefing one more time. Around him, his crew worked quietly, preparing for what the Galactic Council had called humanity's greatest opportunity. Reed was a practical man in his 40s, with graying hair and steady hands. He'd served in Earth's merchant marine for 20 years before joining the colonial service. He'd seen dangerous planets before, but nothing like what the briefing described. Captain, called Navigator Hayes from her station. We're receiving the final data package from the Council. Environmental readings, atmospheric composition, surface maps, what they have of them anyway. Reed nodded. Display the basics on the main screen. The bridge's large display lit up with information that made several crew members take sharp breaths. Korath Prime was larger than Earth with nearly twice the gravity. The atmosphere was breathable but thick with industrial pollutants that would corrode most metals within days. Surface temperatures ranged from freezing to boiling depending on the weather, which changed without warning. The planet experienced acid rain, lightning storms that could last for weeks, and seismic activity that regularly reshaped the landscape. And the wildlife? Asked Dr. Stone, the expedition's chief scientist. She was a small woman with curious eyes who seemed more excited than worried about their destination. Hayes pulled up another data file. Hostile doesn't begin to cover it. Carnivorous plants that actively hunt prey, pack hunters the size of elephants, flying creatures with acidics, breath. And that's just what previous expeditions managed to catalog before. She didn't finish the sentence. Before they all died, completed Chief Engineer Mills dryly. Mills was a big man with calloused hands who'd spent years building settlements on frontier worlds. Well, at least we know what we're walking into. Reed studied the data for a long moment. Something bothered him about this whole mission, though he couldn't put his finger on it. The Galactic Council had been surprisingly generous with this opportunity, especially given how they'd treated humanity's other requests. They'd even provided a ship and basic supplies, though Reed noticed the equipment was all older models. Reliable, but not the latest technology. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Lang, "I'm picking up the Council observation ship on long-range sensors. They're maintaining distance but following our course." "Observation ship?" Reed frowned. That wasn't mentioned in the briefing. Dr. Stone looked up from her scientific instruments. Maybe they want to document humanity's first attempt at colonizing a Class 15 world, for historical records. Mills snorted. Or maybe they want to watch us fail. Did anyone else notice they gave us exactly enough supplies for 6 months? Not a year, not 2 years, 6 months, like they're expecting us to give up by then. Reed had noticed the same thing. The more he thought about it, the more this felt less like an opportunity and more like a test, or worse, a trap. But 500 human colonists were counting on him to get them safely to their new home, whatever the Council's real motives might be. "How long until we reach Korath Prime?" he asked. 18 hours, sir," Hayes replied. Reed looked around at his crew. Good. People who'd volunteered for this mission despite its obvious dangers. Behind them, through the ship's corridors, were 500 more humans who'd left Earth behind for a chance at a new life. Families with children, young couples looking for adventure, older folks seeking one last frontier, scientists eager to study an unexplored world, engineers ready to build something from nothing. They'd all read the briefings. They all knew the risks. And they'd all come anyway, because that's what humans did. When faced with the impossible, they didn't back down. They figured out how to make it work. "All right, people," Reed said, his voice calm and steady. "We've got 18 hours to finalize our landing preparations. Dr. Stone, I want detailed analysis of those environmental readings. Mills, double-check all our equipment and make sure we have backup plans for when things break down. Hayes, plot us the safest possible landing approach." As his crew got to work, Reed took one last look at the data about Korath Prime. Somewhere out there, an alien observation ship was following them, probably filled with Council members expecting to watch humanity's newest colony collapse within days. Reed smiled grimly. Maybe they would fail. Maybe Korath Prime would prove too much even for human stubbornness. But if the Council thought humans would give up without a fight, they were about to learn something new about the species they'd so casually dismissed. The determination flew on through space, carrying 500 humans toward what the galaxy considered certain death. In the observation ship following behind, Ambassador Vex watched their approach with satisfaction, already composing the report he'd send back to the Council about humanity's inevitable failure. Neither he nor Captain Reed could have predicted what would actually happen when humans met their first real death world. The first thing that hit the humans was the smell. Even before the landing shuttles touched down on Korath Prime's surface, the filtered air systems couldn't completely block the harsh chemical stench that seeped through every seal. It was like breathing inside a battery factory mixed with rotting eggs and burning metal. Captain Reed gripped his safety harness as Shuttle Alpha bounced through the violent atmospheric entry. Around him, 25 colonists held on tight while the small craft shook like a toy in a hurricane. Through the tiny windows, flashes of green lightning lit up angry purple clouds that stretched to every horizon. "Landing zone coming up," called Pilot Martinez over the intercom, her voice strained with concentration. "It's going to be rough, people. This storm isn't giving us any breaks." Reed looked at the readouts on his wrist display. Outside temperature, 47 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric pressure, 2.3 times Earth normal. Wind speed, 85 kilometers per hour with gusts up to 120. And they were landing during what the previous survey teams had called mild weather. The shuttle slammed into the ground hard enough to rattle teeth. Through the cabin, Reed heard the hiss of the air recycling system working overtime to filter the toxic atmosphere outside. Emergency lights flickered as the shuttle's electronics struggled with the electromagnetic interference from the constant lightning. "Hull integrity holding," Martinez reported. "But I'm seeing corrosion warnings already. Whatever's in this air, it doesn't like our metal." Reed unstrapped himself and moved to the small window. What he saw outside made his stomach tighten. The landscape looked like a battlefield designed by nightmares. Black soil stretched in all directions, broken by twisted rock formations that glowed faintly with some kind of mineral phosphorescence. Strange trees, if they could be called trees, reached toward the storm clouds with branches that moved too much in the wind, like they were grasping for something. "Captain," came Dr. Stone's voice over the radio from Shuttle Beta. "You need to see this. Our landing scanners are picking up movement, big movement, and it's heading our way." Reed activated his personal scanner and swept it across the area. Outside their shuttle, the readings made him frown. Multiple heat signatures, each one larger than a grown human, were converging on their landing zone from 3 different directions. "All shuttles, this is Reed," he said into his communicator. "We have incoming contact. Everyone stays inside until we know what we're dealing with." But even as he spoke, something slammed into the side of Shuttle Alpha with enough force to tip it slightly. Through the reinforced window, Reed caught sight of what looked like a plant, but a plant with teeth and claws that scraped against the shuttle's hull, leaving deep scratches in the military-grade armor. "Jesus," whispered Martinez. "That thing's trying to eat our shuttle." Aboard the observation ship hovering safely in orbit, Ambassador Vex watched the human landing with satisfaction. Multiple screens showed feeds from automated surveillance drones that the Council had deployed around Korath Prime years ago. "The first shuttle has been grounded for 12 minutes, reported his aide, a young Altari named Kess. "Local predators have already located their position. Estimated time until first casualties, 6 to 8 minutes. Vex nodded approvingly. "Are the other shuttles experiencing similar difficulties?" "Yes, sir. Shuttle Beta is under attack by a pack of what they are. Database identifies as stalker vines, carnivorous plants that typically work together to bring down large prey. Shuttle Gamma has landed in what appears to be a nest of acid spitters." "Excellent," Vex said, settling back in his comfortable chair. "Begin recording everything. The other Council members will want to see exactly how quickly these humans collapse when faced with real danger." On the screens, they could see several humans in environmental suits trying to exit their shuttles, only to be driven back by attacks from creatures that defied easy description. One appeared to be a cross between a crocodile and a giant centipede, with dozens of legs and a mouth full of rotating teeth. Another looked like a walking tree, except its branches ended in snapping mouths instead of leaves. "The humans are trapped in their landing craft," Kess observed. "Standard protocol for most species at this point would be to call for immediate evacuation." Vex smiled his cold smile. "Contact the human ship in orbit. Let's see how long it takes Captain Reed to admit defeat and beg for rescue." But Captain Reed wasn't thinking about rescue. He was thinking about lunch. "Dr. Stone," he said into his communicator, "what do we know about the digestive systems of these creatures attacking us?" "Excuse me?" came her puzzled reply from Shuttle Beta. "I'm looking at this plant thing trying to chew through our hull," Reed explained calmly, "and I'm wondering what it eats normally. Because if it's trying this hard to get to us, maybe we taste like something it already hunts." Dr. Stone was quiet for a moment. "That's actually brilliant, Captain. Give me a few minutes to run some scans." While she worked, Reed turned to the colonists in his shuttle. They were scared. He could see it in their faces, but they weren't panicking. Marines Beck and Torres had their weapons ready. Engineer Mills was studying the hull damage with professional interest. Even the families with children were staying calm, trusting their leaders to find a solution. "Okay, people," Reed said. "Here's what we're going to do. These creatures are treating us like prey, which means they're probably not as smart as they are dangerous. Mills, what would happen if we vented some of our waste heat through the hull?" Mills understood immediately. "Make ourselves look less appetizing? Yeah, that could work. Give me 5 minutes. Me 5. Dr. Stone," Reed continued, "can you identify what these things are actually hunting? What's their normal food source?" "Already on it," came her reply. "Fascinating, Captain. These stalker vines appear to be ambush predators that normally hunt something called tunnel borers, large underground creatures that generate significant heat signatures. If we could somehow mimic the defensive mechanisms of these tunnel borers—" "You mean fight back," said Marine Beck, checking his weapon. "I like that better than hiding." Reed made his decision. "All shuttles, this is Reed. We're not waiting for rescue. We're going on the offensive, but we do this smart. Dr. Stone, I want you to identify weak points on these creatures. Mills, prepare defensive modifications to our shuttles. Beck, Torres, and all security personnel. You're with me. For first contact." Ambassador Vex nearly dropped his drink when the first human emerged from Shuttle Alpha. Captain Reed stepped out into the toxic atmosphere of Korath Prime, wearing a basic environmental suit and carrying what appeared to be a modified mining laser. Behind him came 2 more humans, armed and moving with the kind of tactical precision that made Vex uncomfortable. "What are they doing?" Kess asked, staring at the screens. "No species has ever voluntarily exited their craft during a predator assault on Korath Prime." The stalker vine that had been trying to eat Shuttle Alpha turned toward the humans with obvious interest. It was a massive thing, easily 3 meters tall, with a trunk like a twisted tree and branches that ended in tooth-filled mouths. It should have been able to kill 3 humans without effort. Instead, Reed calmly raised his mining laser and fired a sustained beam directly at what Dr. Stone had identified as the creature's primary nervous cluster. The stalker vine made a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe and collapsed. "Effective," Reed said into his communicator, his voice perfectly steady. "Dr. Stone, the neural cluster location was accurate. How many more of these things are we dealing with?" "Shuttle Beta is engaging 4 stalker vines," came her reply, and Vex could hear weapon fire in the background. "Shuttle Gamma has 2 acid spitters, but Mills has found their digestive weak point. And Captain, something interesting is happening. The local electromagnetic readings are actually decreasing now that we're fighting back." Reed nodded, then noticed something that made him smile grimly. Other creatures in the area, things that had been approaching to investigate the noise, had stopped moving toward the humans and were now backing away. "They're pack hunters," he realized aloud. "But they're not used to prey that fights back effectively. Torres, help me drag this carcass closer to the shuttles. I want the other predators to see exactly what happens when they mess with humans." In the observation ship, Ambassador Vex stared at the screens in growing disbelief. Not only were the humans not dying, they were actively hunting the creatures that had destroyed 3 previous alien expeditions, and they were doing it calmly, methodically, like it was just another day at work. "Sir," Kess said quietly, "perhaps we should inform the Council that the situation is developing differently than predicted." Vex said nothing. On the screens, he watched human engineers using parts from dead predators to reinforce their shuttle hulls against the acid rain. He watched human scientists collecting samples of everything they killed, already adapting to use local resources. He watched human families setting up temporary shelters in the wreckage of creatures that had terrorized this world for millennia. By the end of the first day, all 500 humans had successfully landed on Korath Prime. 0 casualties, 0 requests for evacuation. Instead, Captain Reed's final report of the day contained a single terrifying sentence. "Landing phase complete. Beg." 3 weeks after landing, Engineer Mills stood in what used to be a nest of acid spitters and marveled at what they'd built. The former predator den had been transformed into humanity's first permanent structure on Korath Prime, a workshop that hummed with activity as colonists turned the planet's dangers into useful tools. "Hand me that acid sack," Mills called to his assistant, a young woman named Parker who'd volunteered for the engineering corps. "Carefully now. These things still pack a punch even after the creature's dead." Parker lifted the biocontainer with practiced ease. 3 weeks of working with alien biochemistry had taught all the humans to handle materials that would have terrified them back on Earth. The acid sac contained a chemical compound that, when properly processed, could dissolve almost any mineral they'd encountered on Korath Prime. "Perfect for mining operations," Mills muttered, carefully connecting the sac to their improvised refinery. "What took the Vrex months to dig, we can clear in hours." Outside the workshop, the sound of construction echoed across their growing settlement. Where the first day had been about survival, the following weeks had been about adaptation. The humans had discovered something that the previous alien expeditions had missed. Korath Prime wasn't just trying to kill them, it was trying to communicate. Dr. Stone emerged from the workshop's makeshift laboratory, holding a tablet displaying her latest findings. Her environmental suit was stained with various alien chemicals, but her eyes were bright with excitement. "Mills, you need to see this," she said, pulling up a complex diagram. "Remember how we thought the lightning storms were random? They're not. They follow patterns based on underground mineral deposits. The planet is essentially telling us where to find the richest mining sites." Mills looked at the data and whistled low. "So every time we see those green lightning clusters—" "Exactly. Concentrated rare earth deposits. The Zephyrians probably ran from storms that were actually pointing them toward the most valuable resources in the sector." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Reed, who walked in carrying what looked like a flowering branch. But as he got closer, both Mills and Dr. Stone could see that the flowers were actually small, tooth-lined mouths that snapped playfully at Reed's fingers. "Captain," Dr. Stone said carefully, "please tell me you didn't just domesticate a carnivorous plant." Reed grinned. "Meet our new security system. Turns out these snap blossoms only attack creatures that produce certain stress hormones. They're basically living alarm systems. Plant them around the perimeter, and they'll only bite intruders." Mills shook his head in amazement. 3 weeks ago, plants like that were trying to eat us." 3 weeks ago, we were stressed and afraid," Reed replied. "Now we're confident and settled. The local ecosystem is responding to our emotional state. It's like the planet can sense that we're not just visitors anymore, we're residents." This was the pattern that had emerged across their settlement. What the Galactic Council had classified as impossibly hostile was actually a complex ecosystem that responded to the behavior and attitude of new arrivals. Previous alien expeditions had approached Korath Prime with fear and desperation, triggering aggressive responses from the native life forms. But humans had approached it with curiosity and determination, and the planet had responded differently. Marine Beck jogged back into the settlement, returning from his morning patrol with a string of what looked like rainbow-colored fish slung over his shoulder. Except these fish had wings and could breathe fire when threatened. "Breakfast is served," he announced to the group of colonists gathered around the central cooking area. "Flame fishers, caught fresh from the thermal vents. Dr. Stone, you were right about the spice glands. They taste like nothing we've ever had on Earth." Beck had adapted to Korath Prime better than anyone expected. The former military man had discovered that the planet's dangerous wildlife responded well to confident, respectful hunting practices. Instead of trying to eliminate threats, he'd learned to work with the ecosystem's natural patterns. "Any trouble out there?" asked Torres, who was working on expanding their communications array. "Spotted a pack of tunnel crawlers about 2 kilometers east," Beck reported. "But they kept their distance. I think word is spreading among the local wildlife that humans aren't easy prey." This wasn't just Beck's imagination. Dr. Stone had documented behavioral changes in dozens of species around their settlement. Predators that had been aggressively territorial were now maintaining respectful distances. Scavengers were actually helping clean up areas around human structures. Even the notorious stalker vines had begun growing in patterns that seemed designed to provide natural windbreaks for the human buildings. It's like the planet is adapting to us at the same time we're adapting to it, Dr. Stone had written in her daily reports. Rather than seeing us as an invasive species, Korath Prime appears to be treating us as a new type of native life form. In the observation ship, Ambassador Vex paced back and forth in front of the monitoring screens, his silver skin flushed with frustration. The daily reports from the surveillance drones painted a picture that contradicted everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about Class 15 death worlds. "Show me the population count again," he demanded. Kess pulled up the latest data. 547 humans currently on the surface, sir. That's up from the original 500. Up? Vex stopped pacing. How is it up? Births, sir. 3 babies have been born since the colony was established and... Kess hesitated. And what? Requests for transfer, sir. Humans from other colonies are asking to be relocated to Korath Prime. They're calling it a paradise world in their communications. Vex stared at the screens showing the human settlement. What had started as a few defensive shelters was now a thriving town with permanent buildings, cultivated gardens, and even recreational areas. Children played in parks built around tamed carnivorous plants. Adults worked in harmony with creatures that had killed entire alien expeditions. Paradise world, he repeated numbly. They're calling a Class 15 death world a paradise. Sir, Kess said quietly, perhaps we should consider the possibility that our classification system doesn't account for certain variables. Before Vex could respond, their communications officer rushed in. Ambassador, we're receiving a transmission from the human colony. It's addressed to the Galactic Council. Vex felt a chill run down his spine. Put it through. Captain Reed's face appeared on the main screen. He was standing in what appeared to be a comfortable office with windows that looked out over the human settlement. Behind him, alien plants grew in decorative pots, and the sound of human laughter could be heard from somewhere nearby. Greetings, Ambassador Vex, Reed said with a polite smile. I wanted to provide you with our 3-week status report. Vex found his voice. Captain Reed, I trust you're managing the challenges of your new environment? Reed's smile widened. Challenges? Ambassador, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Korath Prime isn't challenging us, it's welcoming us. We've established a permanent settlement successfully integrated with the local ecosystem and begun preliminary resource extraction. Operations? Resource extraction? Vex felt his stomach drop. The rare earth deposits here are incredibly rich, Reed continued cheerfully. We estimate that within 6 months, we'll be able to supply refined materials to the entire sector at competitive prices. We're also developing new technologies based on the planet's unique biochemistry. The potential for scientific advancement is extraordinary. Vex looked at the screens showing the human settlement. What he'd intended as a death sentence had become an economic opportunity. Captain, surely you've experienced some difficulties. Well, the learning curve was steep, Reed admitted, but that's true of any new environment. The key was approaching the situation with the right attitude. Instead of seeing Korath Prime as hostile, we've learned to see it as protective. The planet has incredibly sophisticated systems for identifying and eliminating threats to its ecosystem. But once we proved we weren't a threat, that we were actually beneficial, those same systems began working to help us. Beneficial? Vex could barely form the words. Absolutely. Our presence has actually stabilized several environmental systems that were in flux. The electromagnetic storms have decreased by 40% since we arrived. Mineral extraction activities have improved water table flow. And our agricultural experiments are producing food sources that native species are incorporating into their own diets. Reed paused as if considering his next words carefully. Ambassador, I wanted to thank the Council for this opportunity. Korath Prime is everything we hoped for in a new home. In fact, we've been contacted by several other human colonies requesting permission to establish similar settlements on other Class 15 worlds. The transmission ended, leaving Vex staring at a blank screen. In the silence that followed, he could hear the quiet hum of his ship's systems and the distant sound of Kess updating the colony status files. "Sir," Kess said finally, "what should we report to the council?" Vex looked at the monitoring screens one more time. Human children were playing in gardens filled with plants that could kill most alien species. Human adults were working alongside creatures that had been classified as apex predators. 6 months after landing, Dr. Stone stood at the edge of what had once been called the Dead Valley, a barren stretch of land where even Korath Prime's hardy predators had refused to venture. Now it bloomed with strange, beautiful plants that glowed softly in the perpetual twilight of the planet's storm-covered sky. "The transformation is remarkable," she said into her recording device, walking carefully between rows of cultivated alien flora. What we initially classified as dead soil was actually a complex mineral matrix waiting for the right catalyst. Human agricultural techniques combined with local biochemistry have created an entirely new ecosystem. Behind her, Farmer Liu tended to his crops with the same care he'd once used for wheat fields back on Earth. The plants he grew now would have been impossible to imagine 6 months ago. Hybrid organisms that combined human agricultural knowledge with Korath Prime's natural adaptability. "Dr. Stone," Liu called, holding up a fruit that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "The energy melons are ready for harvest. Mills wants to test them in the new power generators." Dr. Stone accepted the fruit, marveling at its warm weight. The energy melons were perhaps humanity's greatest breakthrough on Korath Prime. Living batteries that could store and release electrical power with 95% efficiency. A single fruit could power a human dwelling for a week. "Liu, how many of these did your fields produce this month?" "About 3,000, Liu replied casually. "And that's just from the test plots. Once we expand to the full valley, we're looking at maybe 50,000 per month." Dr. Stone smiled. 50,000 energy melons per month would be enough to power a city. Back on Earth, such technology would revolutionize civilization. Here on Korath Prime, it was just one of dozens of innovations the colonists had developed, by working with their environment instead of against it. In the settlement's expanded communication center, Torres was fielding the 5th request for immigration that day. The calls had been coming in steadily for months. Humans from colonies across the galaxy who wanted to relocate to what had become known as the Miracle World. "New Shanghai colony, this is Korath Prime," Torres said into her headset. "Yes, we're still accepting new residents, but I have to warn you about the application process. It's not as simple as just showing up." The voice on the other end was eager, almost desperate. "We understand there are challenges, but we've heard about the opportunities, the resource extraction, the new technologies, the quality of life improvements." Torres looked out the window at the thriving settlement. The original 500 colonists had grown to over 2,000 people, with more arriving every week. But not everyone who came to Korath Prime succeeded. The planet still demanded respect, adaptation, and the right attitude. "The biggest challenge isn't the environment," Torres explained patiently. "It's changing how you think about the environment. Korath Prime doesn't just test your survival skills, it tests your ability to become part of something larger than yourself." This was the lesson that had taken months for even the humans to fully understand. Korath Prime wasn't hostile to all life. It was protective of its own ecosystem. Species that tried to dominate or exploit the planet faced its wrath. But species that learned to contribute to the ecosystem's health and balance found themselves welcomed and supported. The failed alien expeditions had approached Korath Prime like conquerors. They'd brought weapons to fight the wildlife, machines to reshape the landscape, and shields to protect themselves from the environment. Every action had marked them as threats to be eliminated. Humans had initially made the same mistakes. But their natural adaptability had allowed them to recognize the pattern and change their approach. Instead of fighting the planet, they'd learned to dance with it. Captain Reed walked through the settlement's newest district where human architects worked alongside native crystal formations to create buildings that seemed to grow from the planet itself. The structures were more beautiful than anything he'd seen on Earth, organic curves that channeled wind and rain into power systems, walls that filtered air and regulated temperature naturally, foundations that actually strengthened the ground they were built on. "Captain," called Engineer Mills from the construction site of their newest project, "you need to see this." Reed approached the foundation dig, where Mills and his team were working on what would become Korath Prime's first industrial complex. But instead of the usual concrete and steel construction, they were cultivating specialized organisms that would serve as living machinery. "We've successfully bred the processor colonies," Mills explained, pointing to what looked like a pool of shimmering metallic liquid. "These organisms can break down raw ore and separate rare minerals with 99.7% efficiency. No heat, no toxic waste, no energy consumption beyond basic feeding." Reed stared at the pool of living metal refiners. "How long until full production?" 2 weeks for the first line, maybe 6 weeks for full industrial capacity. "Captain, when this gets out, every mining operation in the galaxy is going to want this technology." But Reed was thinking about more than just mining. The implications of truly biological technology, organisms that could manufacture, process, and refine materials without the industrial pollution that plagued most civilized worlds, would change everything. Not just for humans, but for every species in the galaxy. "Mills, I want you to start documenting everything. Full technical specifications, breeding protocols, care and feeding requirements. Make sure we can teach this to others." Mills looked surprised. "Sir, this technology could give humanity a massive economic advantage. Why would we share it?" Reed looked out over their thriving settlement, where human children played alongside alien creatures in perfect harmony. "Because that's not what Korath Prime has taught us. This planet doesn't reward greed or competition. It rewards cooperation and balance. If we try to hoard these innovations, we'll be acting like the old alien expeditions that failed here." In the observation ship, Ambassador Vex read the latest intelligence reports with growing alarm. The humans on Korath Prime weren't just surviving, they were thriving in ways that challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. Economic projections show that Korath Prime will be the most productive world in 3 sectors within a year, reported his aide. "Their resource extraction rates exceed anything we've seen, but with 0 environmental damage. Their agricultural yields are impossible by conventional standards, and their technological innovations—" "I can read," Vex snapped, but his anger was directed at himself as much as the situation. Every projection the Council had made about humanity's failure on Korath Prime had been wrong. "Sir, we've also detected unauthorized Council species attempting to establish their own settlements on Class 15 worlds. 2 Vrex expeditions, 1 Zephyrian research team, and a Kresh mining operation. All of them citing the human success model as justification." Vex felt his stomach clench. If other species started successfully colonizing death worlds using human techniques, the entire balance of galactic power would shift. The most valuable real estate in the galaxy, the resource-rich, worlds that everyone had written off as uninhabitable, would suddenly become the new centers of civilization. And the results of those expeditions? The Vrex lasted 3 days before evacuation. The Zephyrians made it a week, but lost half their team to environmental hazards. The Kresh. The aide paused. "The Kresh are still trying, sir, but their casualty rates are approaching 60%. Of course they were failing." Vex understood now what he'd missed before. The humans hadn't succeeded on Korath Prime because they were tougher or more advanced than other species. They'd succeeded because they'd approached the challenge with a fundamentally different mindset. "Sir," the aide continued quietly, "there's something else. We've been monitoring communications between human colonies. They're planning to establish settlements on 12 more Class 15 worlds within the next 2 years. 12 more worlds. If humans could replicate their Korath Prime success even half as well on other death worlds, they would control the most resource-rich territories in the galaxy within a decade." "Contact the Council," Vex said finally. "Request an emergency session. We need to discuss revising our approach to humanity." As his aide hurried away, Vex looked one more time at the screens showing the human settlement. What had started as 500 desperate colonists had become a thriving city of over 2,000 people. Their buildings gleamed in harmony with the alien landscape. Their children grew up speaking both human languages and the chemical communication methods of native species. Their scientists had made breakthrough discoveries that would advance galactic knowledge by centuries. The punishment that was supposed to humble humanity had instead given them the keys to galactic dominance. Vex had the uncomfortable realization that the hunters had become the prey. The Galactic Council had thought they were setting a trap for humanity. Instead, they had trapped themselves. 1 year after landing on Korath Prime, Captain Reed stood in the Grand Council chamber of what had once been an impossible dream. A thriving human city built in harmony with one of the galaxy's most dangerous worlds. The chamber itself was a marvel of bioengineering. Its walls formed from living crystal that pulsed gently with stored energy from the planet's lightning storms. Around the circular table sat representatives from 12 different human colonies, all of them eager to learn the secrets of Korath Prime's success. But Reed's attention was focused on the large viewing screen that showed an incoming council ship, the first official visit from the Galactic Council since the colony's establishment. "Captain," said Dr. Stone, entering the chamber with a thick datapad in her hands. "The final numbers are ready for the council presentation." Reed accepted the pad and scrolled through the statistics that told the story of humanity's transformation from galactic newcomers to a major power. In 12 months, Korath Prime had gone from an empty death world to the most economically productive planet in 3 sectors. Population, 5,847 humans, with immigration requests backlogged for 18 months. Resource production, 340% above galactic. Average for similar-sized colonies. Technological innovations, 67 major breakthroughs including biological manufacturing, living energy storage, and symbiotic construction methods. Environmental impact, net positive. The planet's ecosystem was healthier than it had been in centuries. Most importantly, Dr. Stone added, we've had 0 major accidents, 0 environmental disasters, and 0 conflicts with native species in the past 6 months. Korath Prime isn't just supporting human life, it's actively helping us thrive. Reed looked out the chamber's massive windows at the city beyond. Human children played in parks where carnivorous plants had learned to provide shade and protection. Human workers collaborated with alien organisms in factories that produced goods without pollution. Human artists created sculptures that incorporated living materials, creating artworks that grew and changed over time. "Any word from the other Death World colonies?" Reed asked. "All successful," Dr. Stone replied with obvious pride. "New Titan colony on Hellforge Prime is already extracting rare minerals using the biological processes we developed here. The Stormbreak settlement has found ways to harness planetary electrical systems for unlimited clean energy. And Deepwater Colony has established the first underwater human city, using symbiotic relationships with aquatic predators." Each success story represented the same pattern. Humans approaching impossible environments with curiosity instead of fear, adaptation instead of domination. Where other species saw death traps, humans saw opportunities for partnership. Ambassador Vex stepped off the council transport shuttle, feeling like a man walking to his own execution. The year since the human experiment began had been the most humiliating of his long career. What was supposed to be a simple lesson in humility had become a disaster for the established galactic order. The human settlement that greeted him was unlike anything in his experience. Instead of the typical colonial outposts, sterile domes and defensive barriers, he saw a city that seemed to have grown naturally from the planet itself. Buildings curved and flowed like living things. Gardens bloomed with impossible beauty. The very air hummed with energy that felt both alien and welcoming. "Ambassador Vex." Captain Reed approached with a warm smile and an extended hand, the human gesture of greeting that Vex had learned to expect. "Welcome to Korath Prime. I hope you'll find your stay enlightening." Vex accepted the handshake, noting that Reed's grip was firm but not aggressive. This was confidence, not hostility. "Captain Reed, I must admit your settlement is more extensive than our intelligence suggested. Intelligence? Reed laughed, a sound that Vex found oddly comforting despite himself. Ambassador, we've been sending detailed reports to the Council every week for a year. Nothing here is secret. In fact, we've been hoping the Council would visit sooner. We have so much we'd like to share. As they walked through the settlement, Vex found himself constantly surprised. Children of multiple species played together. Not just human children, but young aliens whose families had requested permission to live in the human settlement. Markets sold goods that represented fusion of human innovation and alien biology. Artists from across the galaxy had come to study the new forms of living architecture. This wasn't what we expected, Vex admitted. Reed nodded thoughtfully. I imagine not. When you sent us here, you were thinking like conquerors. You assumed we'd try to dominate this world, and when that failed, we'd either die or flee. But humans don't think like conquerors, Ambassador. We think like partners. They stopped at an observation platform that overlooked the city's industrial district. Instead of the smokestacks and pollution that marked most galactic manufacturing centers, Vex saw gentle organic structures that seemed to breathe with the planet's natural rhythms. How? Vex asked simply. We listened, Reed replied. Every world, every ecosystem, every environment has its own needs and patterns. Instead of trying to impose our will, we learned to work within those patterns. Korath Prime didn't want to kill us. It wanted to test us. Once we proved we could be beneficial partners rather than destructive parasites, everything changed. In the Council Transport's Communication Center, Vex composed the most difficult report of his career. Around him, his staff worked quietly, all of them understanding the implications of what they'd witnessed. The humans have not simply survived on Korath Prime, he dictated to his recording device. They have transformed it into the most successful colony in recorded galactic history. More significantly, they have developed technologies and techniques that render our current understanding of planetary classification obsolete. He paused, looking out at the human city through the transport's windows. Even from orbit, he could see the gentle glow of energy systems, the organic flow of transportation networks, the integration of natural and constructed elements. The humans are currently planning to establish settlements on 47 additional Class 15 worlds within the next 5 years. Early reports from their existing Death World colonies suggest success rates approaching 100%. If these projections prove accurate, humanity will control the most resource-rich territories in the galaxy within a generation. The political implications were staggering. For millennia, the Galactic Council had been built on the assumption that Class 15 worlds were uninhabitable. Entire economic systems depended on the scarcity of resources that could only be safely extracted from less dangerous planets. If humans could successfully colonize and develop death worlds, they would control resources that dwarfed the combined wealth of all existing Council species. Furthermore, Vex continued, the humans have expressed willingness to share their techniques with other species. They have already begun accepting non-human residents in their settlements and have offered to provide training and support for other species attempting Death World colonization. This was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire situation. Instead of using their advantages to dominate other species, humans seemed genuinely interested in cooperation and mutual benefit. It was an approach to galactic politics that none of the Council species had anticipated. Captain Reed stood in the same landing zone where the first human shuttles had touched down 1 year earlier. The scorched earth and acid-scarred rocks had been replaced by a beautiful garden where human children played alongside young creatures that would have terrified the original colonists. Beside him, Ambassador Vex prepared to board his transport, back to the Council chambers where he would deliver his report. The ambassador's silver skin had lost some of its metallic sheen, and his dark eyes held a thoughtful expression that hadn't been there when he arrived. Captain, Vex said as his shuttle prepared for departure, the Council will likely offer humanity a formal apology for this experiment. They may also offer relocation assistance to move your people to more suitable worlds. Reed smiled and shook his head. Ambassador, with all due respect, we're exactly where we want to be. Korath Prime isn't our punishment, it's our home, and as for more suitable worlds, he gestured at the thriving settlement around them. I can't imagine anywhere more suitable than this. Vex nodded slowly. The council also wanted me to ask about your expansion plans. There are concerns about humans claiming too many death worlds too quickly. No claims necessary, Reed replied. Easily. Any species that wants to learn our methods is welcome to try. We'd be happy to provide guidance and support. The galaxy is big enough for all of us to find suitable homes. As Vex's shuttle lifted off, Reed remained in the garden, watching alien children chase butterfly-like creatures that glowed in the perpetual twilight. Around him, the city hummed with the quiet energy of successful partnership between human innovation and alien environment. The Galactic Council had thought they were teaching humanity a lesson about their place in the galactic hierarchy. Instead, they had accidentally given humans the tools to reshape that hierarchy entirely. But perhaps most importantly, they had discovered that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their adaptability or their persistence or their technology. It was their ability to turn enemies into friends. Gaich.